found potential evidence against a new possible suspect, Dr. Bruce Ivins, a senior biosecurity researcher. Bruce Ivins was born in Lebanon, Ohio in 1946. He was the youngest of 3 brothers and admired his father, a pharmacist who owned a local drugstore. According to Charles, one of Bruce's older brothers, their mother was extremely violent and abusive during their childhood. He recalled a time when his mother threw herself down a flight of stairs while pregnant with Bruce, who she wanted to abort. It's obvious why Bruce followed in his father's footsteps,
Lebanon, Ohio,
with science in school. Subtle foreshadowing came in the form of his senior thesis, a dissertation on the toxicity of disease-causing bacteria. Bruce was an undoubtedly skilled scientist for 36 years, 18 of which were at the Fort Detrick facility in Maryland. After news of the 1979 Sverdlovsk anthrax outbreak, Bruce, who had been concerned with Legionella, cholera, and chlamydia, turned his attention to anthrax. So much so that in 2003, Bruce became co-creator of 2 US patents for anthrax vaccine technology. Decades of hard work would be thrown away once Bruce was suspected as being a possible culprit. He had all the skills necessary to carry out the attacks, being an expert scientist for almost 40 years. He worked in the biodefense lab at Fort Detrick, the known location of the RMR 1029 flask. By 2007, the clues were lining up to Bruce. The Amerithrax task force had a new prime suspect. It was only a matter of time before authorities would find irrefutable evidence implicating Bruce in the 2001 attacks. They installed a GPS tracker on his car and began to regularly search his trash. On November 1st, 2007, law enforcement executed a search warrant of his home, collecting valuable evidence for their investigation. First was a collection of letters sent to Congress and media, that which held similarities to the anthrax letters. There were also 3 handguns, 2 stun guns, a taser, electronic detection devices, and apparent spying software. Either Bruce was readying for another attack or expecting the zombie apocalypse, because he was also using his basement as a makeshift firing range. As time passed and the evidence was organized, Bruce became the only suspect. I mean, who else could it be? Bruce liked to take...
Yeah. Well, you know, good thing we have all the answers, right? Certainly nothing will happen to Bruce that will stop this investigation. I mean, we'll be able to find out after the top of the hour ad break is over, or just kidding, will I paywall it with the top of the hour ad break, urging you to subscribe so you know the actual answers to what will happen. Subscribers will know because they won't get paywalled for 3 minutes. Whereas at the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break. And if you're not subscribed, you will see the ad. Instead, here's the 3-minute ad break now.
Long drives without telling his wife so that he can go and deliver letters from distant post offices. The FBI also claims he used a pseudonym while doing so, thereby disguising the mailer's identity. Bruce also lived within close proximity to the source of the anthrax envelopes, which were sold in Frederick, Maryland, used in the 2001 attacks. Apparent motives were found in his personal emails, and he was facing professional pressure from his anthrax vaccine being pulled from the market. Bruce began to show clear signs of struggle with mental health issues, which were said to have been revealed ever since his college years. Bruce was unstable by all accounts. Psychiatrists described him as homicidal and sociopathic, with clear intentions. He had a history of posting death threats to a reality TV star, while threatening violence and planning revenge on those who disparaged him. He was guilty of extreme workplace negligence, having to secretly decontaminate 2 areas, a junior lab tech's desk and his own work quarters. Bruce chose not to report either events. The language used in the letters, at first glance, was attributed to Al-Qaeda, but when you're dealing with the FBI, they like to check things twice. First,
do they? Because, like, they literally ran with the narrative that it was probably Al-Qaeda, and then they found another random guy and said he was the one for 6 fucking years. So, not really. I don't think they were too competent on this. But to be fair, a lot of people always ask me, like, Hasan, what's the conspiracy theory? that you believe that is a conspiracy theory that you think is real, but like, you know, there is at least some evidence that it might not be, it's this one. Okay? Was this dude working at Fort Detrick, working or operating at the behest of the federal government in an effort to create a fear-mongering campaign that would strike at the core, at the heart of the American citizens, thinking that, you know, they're going to send any and every fucking person with a goddamn mailbox a anthrax-laced letter, okay? Or he just happened to be a crazy dude, perfect place, perfect time, okay? Crazy guy who just did this shit. Or a third option, that crazy guy that the government knew was capable of doing some shit like that, nudged in a specific direction, and then they took their sweet ass time with the investigation because it, again, freaked Americans out and basically universalized the 9/11 experience, like the fear of 9/11 for everywhere, for Americans all around the country.
First, all of the letters feature the date 09/11/01. The text indicated some form of Islamic terrorism, along with instances of the letters A and T being bolded. When the letters were separated, investigators got the following message: TTT, AAT, TAT. Triple T equals phenylalanine, and its single letter designator is F. AAT is asparagine, and its single letter designator is N. TAT is tyrosine, which has the single letter designator of Y. Two messages were taken from this: PAT, the nickname of a former colleague, Patricia Warsham, and FNY, fuck New York. According to the Fed's witness testimony, Ivins was a well-known critic of New York. It also just so happens that Bruce was interested in secret codes, owning at least one book dedicated to cryptology. A week before his planned arrest, Bruce threw out the cryptology book and came back outside at 1 a.m. to confirm his trash had been picked up. If convicted of the crimes mounting against him, Bruce could have faced the death penalty. His options to escape this alive were becoming more desperate. He tried to shift blame to other colleagues and even emailed himself, forging a story about why his former peers likely committed the anthrax attacks. By far the strangest behavior exhibited by Bruce was his frequent road trips alone to the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority in Princeton. In his own words, he would lie to his wife, drive 3 hours to the sorority, and sit outside in his car for roughly 10 minutes. After whatever activity Bruce was performing, he would silently drive 3 hours back home. Who knows how many times Bruce did this, but one thing is for certain: he burglarized the sorority on 2 separate occasions, stealing items pertaining to the sorority's ritual. There was simply no explaining this deranged behavior, or the overtime he was clocking at work in the days preceding the anthrax mailing. Early on in the investigation, when Bruce wasn't the prime suspect, he was asked by the FBI to provide samples for RMR 1029. According to investigators, they claimed he provided questionable agents to potentially distract authorities. At this point, there was more than enough evidence to arrest Bruce Ivins as the sole culprit behind the anthrax letters. In 2008, Bruce was involuntarily admitted to a psychiatric hospital as the law enforcement investigation left a toll on his mental health. When asked about the anthrax attacks, Bruce admitted to the FBI he had memory loss and would wake up dressed and wondered if he had gone out that night. Upon returning home and subsequently informed of his impending prosecution, Bruce was found unconscious at his home on July 27, 2008. He died 2 days later of what was recorded as an overdose from a mixture of Tylenol and codeine. This was later amended to death by liver and kidney failure, following the consumption of 2 bottles of Tylenol PM. 8 days after Bruce's...
Well, guys, we'll never be able to find out what actually full-blown happened. I mean...
death, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Taylor released a statement claiming Ivins was the one responsible for the 2001 attacks. The reasons included the fact that he had immunized himself to anthrax, was one of hundreds of scientists with accessibility to the sole strain, and sought to gain from an anthrax epidemic, considering his vaccine patents. Bruce's death brought some closure to the investigation, but there would have to have been more done if people were going to feel safe. The contamination and cleanup of over dozens of buildings had cost taxpayers a staggering $1 billion to decontaminate. If there was to be an end to the panic, legislation was necessary to combat any possibility of a future attack, be it domestic or foreign. A compromise was reached, and before most of America knew.
Yeah. You get an anthrax vaccine. I feel like it fucks you up, right? You get an anthrax vaccine when you join the military, along with many other vaccines, including COVID, which is pretty funny because some of those shots are genuinely fucked up. The ones they give you, which makes the COVID thing laughable, extra laughable.
Knew it. The Judiciary Committee signed the Patriot Act into law. The sad reality is, the death of Bruce Ivins, bipartisan legislation, and a war against terrorism didn't stop biological weapons from being used against the innocent. Another chemical attack struck the United States in 2003, when an unknown individual, going by the name Fallen Angel, released 2 ricin letters. One was sent to the White House, but intercepted at a processing facility. The other was found in South Carolina. Fallen Angel was never found, yet in the letters, they explained to authorities their ownership.
If you change the hours of service on January 4th, I will turn DC into a ghost town. The powder and the letter is ricin. Have a nice day, Fallen. What?
Of a trucking company, and expressed anger over the changes to some federal trucking regulations. To date, the $100,000 reward for finding Fallen Angel remains. Fallen Angel's letter was followed up with another in 2004, when a white powdery substance found in the mailroom of Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist tested positive for ricin. Almost 10 years later, in 2013, another 2 ricin letters were found, one addressed to Senator Roger Wicker and one for President Barack Obama. These letters were also intercepted, and the perpetrator was eventually found. James Everett Dutchke, a man from Mississippi, who was sentenced to 25 years in prison. One of the previous ricin letters was never tied to anyone, showing just how difficult it is to pinpoint a suspect in biological attacks, especially the right one. In stark contrast to the FBI's case against Ivins, PBS Frontline, McClatchy, and ProPublica launched an investigation that paints a different picture. With years to look over the FBI's claims, these sources state that there would have been a significant amount of doubt against their anthrax suspect. The FBI was convinced that they had their guy. After all, he was a total weirdo who exhibited near psychopathic behavior and devoted a portion of his life to studying anthrax. It had to have been him. The fact remains, Ivins never had a chance to defend himself in a court of law. The biggest discrepancy between the FBI's account and ProPublica's is Ivins' deception of law enforcement. On one hand, the FBI claims that he sent them shoddy samples of anthrax spores for testing. They disclosed 2 potential samples that he provided. In reality, he sent them 4, 3 of which had the identical biomarkers known as morphs, which would indicate that the anthrax spores came from his flask RMR 1029. This proves that if Ivins was in fact the bioterrorist, he wasn't trying to cover his tracks, as he sent them spores that actually matched the anthrax strain in the letters. In other words, if Ivins was the killer, he just gave them the murder weapon.
The question is, why would he willingly give? Why would he cooperate with the FBI willingly if he's the one who fucking actually committed these crimes, right? And if he was also openly committing these crimes and wanted to be caught, and that's why he gave this information to FBI, why did he write that he, death to Israel, death to America, Hail Al-Qaeda or whatever the fuck he wrote. You know what I mean? Why would he do that?
Over the course of the FBI's investigation, Ivins worked hand in hand with law enforcement to try and find the source of the anthrax. He wasn't the only one with access to RMR 1029. Additionally, the FBI could not prove that Ivins was capable of creating dry anthrax powder from wet anthrax suspensions, which were typical at Fort Detrick's lab, or the fact that he allegedly created the coded message of Islamic rhetoric. They could only speculate that he had the opportunity to do so. Looking back, it's easy to identify the FBI lied or conveniently didn't disclose the full scope of their investigation. If anything,
this came out after 3 years after his untimely demise, for the record, as Philion points out. This is the ProPublica article. FBI and Justice Department investigators say the Army microbiologist submitted a deceptive sample of anthrax to cover up his role as a perpetrator of the 2001 anthrax letter attacks. Turns out that's not the case. Records found by PBS Frontline show Ivins made available 3 other samples of spores, each of which match those used in the letters. Which doesn't make sense.
The bureaucratic investigators in charge of prosecuting the anthrax attacker overstated their certainty. Was it Hatfill or Ivins all along? Did an unknown third suspect escape justice? When it comes to the truth, we may never know. We can only decide who to trust.
Many of Ivan's former colleagues, by the way, even though he's weird, at the Germ Research Center in Fort Detrick, where they worked, his investigation tested Dugway material and other spores in his inventory, is among numerous indications that the FBI got the wrong man. What kind of murderer, they wonder, would ask the cops to test his own gun for ballistics? The prosecutors who later branded Ivins the killer in a lengthy report. His solicitous email is trumped by a long chain of evidence, much of it circumstantial, that they say would have convinced the jury that he prepared the lethal powder right there under the noses of some of the nation's foremost biodefense scientists. They conducted dozens of interviews, reviewed thousands of pages of FBI files. Much of the case remains unchallenged, notably finding that the anthrax letters were mailed from Princeton, New Jersey, just steps from an office of the cause sorority that Ivins was obsessed with for much of his adult life. But newly available documents and the accounts of Ivins' former colleagues shed fresh light on the evidence, and while they don't exonerate Ivins, are at odds with some of the science and circumstantial evidence that the government said would have convicted him of capital crimes. While the prosecutors continue to vehemently defend their case, even some of government science consultants wonder whether the real killer is still at large. Prosecutors said he tried to hide his guilt. They lied about that. Paul Kemp, who was Ivins' lawyer, said the government never told him about the 2 of the samples discovery called incredible. The fact that the FBI had multiple samples of Ivins' spores that genetically matched anthrax in the letters, Kemp said, debunks the charge that the biologist was trying to cover up his tracks. What I don't understand is, like, why would the FBI just simply not say that he didn't try to fucking interfere with the investigation? It was him, and he leaked it. You can get into the weeds, and you can take little shots of each aspect of our vast, mosaic of evidence against Dr. Ivins, she said in an interview, but in a trial, she said prosecutors would have urged jurors to see the big picture. Scientists who work for the FBI's case do not all share her creativity. Claire Fraser-Liggett, a genetics consultant who provided some of the most important evidence linking Ivins to the attack powder, said she would have voted to acquit. I don't know how it could have been possible to convict him, said Fraser-Liggett, the director of the University of Maryland's Institute of Genome Sciences. Should he have had access to a potential bioweapon given everything that's come to light? I'd say no. Was he totally just off the wall from everything I've seen and read? I'd say yes. But that doesn't mean somebody's a cold-blooded killer. The Justice Department formally closed the anthrax case last year. In identifying Ivins as the perpetrator, prosecutors pointed to his deceptions, his shifting explanations, his obsessions with sorority and former lab technician, his penchant for taking long drives to mail letters under pseudonyms from distant post offices after he fell into drinking and depression with the FBI closing in, his violent threats during group therapy sessions, an FBI search of his home before he died turned up a cache of guns and ammunition. Most of all, prosecutors cited the genetics test as conclusive evidence. Yet the FBI never could prove that Ivins manufactured the dry powder from the type of wet anthrax suspensions used at Fort Detrick. It couldn't prove that he scrawled letters mimicking the hateful rhetoric of Islamic terrorists. And it couldn't prove that he twice slipped away to Princeton to mail letters to the news media outlets and 2 U.S. senators. It could prove only he had an opportunity to do so undetected. So, yeah, It's like one of those very weird, mysterious situations where he's like a weird guy, and it could have been him, but there's no real evidence beyond fucked vibes. And also on top of that, the government literally just had the wrong guy for 5 years. They just like falsely claimed the wrong guy was responsible for this, whose vibes were also fucked in some ways. So just remember that. They were like, oh, well, the details of the first guy's situation was also circumstantial and kind of fucked. So that's the mystery.